There's a strange paradox when it comes to narcissists and guilt. On the surface, they appear indifferent, cold, even triumphant after they've hurt someone. It's easy to assume that they feel nothing, that perhaps their conscience is broken or never existed at all. But that assumption, while comforting in its simplicity, is incomplete. The reality is more complicated and in many ways more disturbing. You see, narcissists are not completely devoid of guilt. They are experts at suppressing it. What they lack is not necessarily the capacity for guilt, but the courage to face it. To admit guilt would mean acknowledging they've caused real harm. And doing that would force them to confront the truth that their grandiose self-omission is a lie, that the person they project to the world is a mask constructed to hide a deep sense of inadequacy. For most narcissists, this confrontation is simply too painful. It threatens the very foundation of their identity. So instead, they do what they've always done. They bury it. They repress the guilt. They twist it. They project it onto others. This repression is not without consequence. It builds internal pressure, like a volcano rumbling beneath the surface. But instead of erupting into honest self-reflection or repentance, it leaks out in the form of rage, blame, and defensiveness. What you want to do is to repress the guilt. It leaks out in the form of rage, blame, and defensiveness. What you want to do is to repress the guilt. It leaks out in the form of rage, blame, and defensiveness. The narcissist must at all costs convince both themselves and you that they are right, even when they are clearly wrong, especially when they are wrong. Their survival depends on it. Psychologically speaking, this behavior is rooted in what Carl Jung called the shadow, the part of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge. The narcissist's shadow is enormous, swollen with years of denial, shame, guilt, and emotional debris. And the more they hurt others, the larger this shadow grows. But instead of integrating it, they disown it. And when you call them out, when you tell them, "You hurt me," you become a mirror reflecting back the very things they cannot face. This is why so many narcissists react with hostility, deflection, or manipulation when confronted. It's not just that they don't want to admit guilt, it's that they can't afford to. Their ego has become a fortress built on denial, and your truth is a battering ram at its gates. If they admit guilt, even once, the entire structure could begin to crumble. But make no mistake, guilt is there. It just doesn't wear the face we expect. It doesn't come with apologies or remorseful tears. It reveals itself in their need to rewrite the story, where they're the victim and you're the aggressor. It reveals itself in their compulsive need to control the narrative, to gaslight, to devalue, to discard. Why? Because deep down they know. They know they crossed a line. And rather than step into the discomfort of accountability, they scramble to regain control. That's how they deal with guilt, by pretending it belongs to someone else. There's also something deeply tragic about this, because guilt, when acknowledged, is redemptive. It can transform a person. It can lead to healing, growth, change. But when guilt is buried, it festers. And the narcissist, rather than being set free by truth, becomes enslaved by illusion. Their need to be seen as perfect becomes a prison, and any challenge to that perfection feels like a death sentence. So they keep hurting others to avoid facing themselves. And yet, ironically, the people they hurt the most are often those who see them most clearly. Those who loved them. Those who offered empathy, compassion, patience. And it's precisely this clarity, the mirror of love, that becomes unbearable Because you don't just see what they show the world, you see beneath it. You see the cracks in the mask. And that threatens them more than anything else. So what does all this mean for you, the person who was hurt? It means their silence doesn't mean they feel nothing. It means their denial is not proof of innocence, it's proof of their fragility, their desperate need to protect an ego that cannot withstand the truth. And when you understand that, something shifts. You stop internalizing their blame, you stop wondering what you did wrong, and you start to see them for what they are. Not monsters, but broken people, terrified of facing themselves. That doesn't excuse the harm they've done, but it does explain why they seem to move on so easily, why they act like it never happened, because to acknowledge your pain would mean acknowledging their guilt, and for them, that's a price too high to pay. The path forward, then, is not in waiting for their apology. It's in recognizing that their inability to face guilt is not your burden to carry. You are not responsible for their healing. You are responsible for your own. And healing begins when you stop seeking validation from someone who cannot even be honest with themselves. Remember this, just because they won't admit the truth doesn't mean it isn't real. Your pain is valid, your experience is real, and their silence is not the absence of guilt, it's the evidence of it. What most people fail to understand about narcissists is that behind their apparent indifference, there's a persistent fear. It's not a fear that they show. In fact, they do everything in their power to conceal it, even from themselves. But it's there, like an underground current beneath all their behaviors. It's the fear of exposure, the fear of being truly seen. Because if you see them, not as they wish to be seen, but as they really are, fragile, ashamed, riddled with inadequacy, then their entire identity structure begins to collapse. This is the paradox. The narcissist constructs an image to survive. That image becomes their armor. They walk into relationships not as their authentic selves, but as a projection. They idealize, they charm, they mirror. But it's all in service of one thing: control. And when that control is lost, when someone sees the discrepancy between the mask and the reality, it triggers profound internal chaos. Now, when they hurt you and you confront them, not necessarily with anger, but with clarity, it destabilizes them. You're no longer playing the role they assigned to you. You're not begging, you're not defending, you're simply stating a fact. You've hurt me, I see it, I know who you are. That moment, as subtle as it may seem, is catastrophic for the narcissist's internal world, because they no longer control the narrative, and when they lose that control, they don't feel remorse. They feel terror. Why terror? Because their entire sense of identity is predicated on maintaining an illusion of superiority, infallibility, perfection. And your awareness, your refusal to accept the lie, threatens that illusion more than anything else. They don't fear your anger. They fear your clarity. They fear your emotional independence. They fear that you can now walk away without needing their validation. And that means you are no longer useful. So what do they do in response to this fear? They double down. They gaslight. They shift blame. They smear. Not because they're confident, but because they're desperate. Desperate to preserve the illusion. Desperate to escape accountability. Desperate to silence the part of themselves that knows they've been seen, not as gods, not as victims, but as deeply flawed human beings pretending to be something they're not. From a psychological standpoint, what they're experiencing is ego fragmentation. The image they work so hard to build begins to crack, and what leaks out is shame. But narcissists are allergic to shame. They've built an entire psychic structure to keep it buried. So rather than feel it, they externalize it. That's why they can say the most hurtful things with a straight face. That's why they can rewrite history overnight. That's why they can abandon you without blinking. Because feeling shame would require humility, it would require self-reflection, and those are faculties they've never developed. In many cases, the narcissist doesn't even know how to access their own emotions. They've split themselves into parts. The part that feels, the child who once longed for love but was wounded is buried, and the part that performs, the mask, the illusion, the controller, is all that remains visible. So when you confront them with truth, it threatens to awaken that buried self. But rather than allow that self to surface, they bury it deeper. Because to feel is to risk breaking open. And breaking open means they lose the one thing they believe keeps them safe, the mask. There is a tragic irony here, because many narcissists were not born cruel. They were made this way, formed through trauma, abandonment, or emotional neglect. Somewhere along the way, they decided, consciously or not, that being real was too dangerous, that vulnerability meant pain. So they constructed a false self to survive. But survival is not the same as living. And this is the painful truth they can't face, that despite all their posturing, they are empty inside. That's what they secretly feel after hurting you. Emptiness. But they'll never admit it. And so they run. Not physically always, but emotionally. They detach. They pretend. They distract themselves with new people, new chaos, new attention. Because sitting with themselves would mean facing a truth they've spent a lifetime avoiding. That they are not who they pretend to be. That they are lonely, and that they have driven away the very people who once loved them most. So, what should you take from all this? Understand that their reaction to your truth is not a measure of your worth. It is a reflection of their fear. Your clarity is powerful. Your emotional strength is a threat, not because you're cruel, but because you're real. And in a narcissist world, reality is the one thing they can't control. You don't need them to admit what they feel. You don't need their validation. What you need is the courage to continue seeing clearly, to choose truth over illusion, even when it's painful. Because once you see, you can never unsee. And that's where your power begins. Their silence is not strength. Their blame is not proof. Their indifference is not peace. It's fear. It's avoidance. It's the echo of a person running from themselves. Let them run. You walk forward. There's a peculiar thing that happens when the narcissist realizes the damage they've caused, not in the grand moral sense, but in the aftermath, when they observe the silence, the distance, or the loss of your emotional energy. They don't articulate it, and they don't show remorse as a healthy person would, but deep down, there is a flicker, a brief, destabilizing realization that they've broken something they might never get back. This flicker is not empathy. It's not accountability. It's the haunting awareness of loss, not of you as a person necessarily, but of the function you served. And that's crucial to understand. You see, to the narcissist, people are rarely seen as individuals with value in and of themselves. They are instruments, mirrors that reflect admiration, emotional containers that absorb projection, validation machines that confirm their constructed self-image when they hurt you, and you begin to withdraw. Or worse, when you begin to see them clearly. They don't grieve like normal people. They panic internally. Because what they've lost is not just a person. They've lost control. They've lost the narrative. They've lost the illusion that they are in charge of how you perceive them. And when someone no longer believes their story, that story starts to collapse from within. This internal collapse isn't loud. It doesn't come with apologies or breakdowns, not usually. It comes with a quiet, almost subconscious recognition that the game has changed. You're not looking at them the same way anymore. You're not responding with the same energy. You're no longer feeding the illusion. And here's what's so telling. When a narcissist senses that change, their first reaction is not reflection, it's retaliation. They might go silent, withdraw, lash out, or immediately seek someone new. Not because they've moved on in a healthy way, but because they're trying to escape the void you've exposed in them. Your absence, your clarity, acts like a mirror they never wanted to face. And the reflection is not flattering. It's terrifying. What's interesting is that this internal discomfort is almost never verbalized. You won't hear them say, "I realize I hurt you and I'm afraid of what that says about me." Instead, they might mock you, accuse you of overreacting, or pretend they don't care. But underneath that performance, there's a deep cognitive dissonance forming. They need to believe they're good. They need to believe they're in control. But your reaction, your withdrawal, your clarity challenges both beliefs. Now you might wonder, do they ever truly regret it? Do they feel remorse in any meaningful way? That depends on how you define regret. If by regret you mean the sorrow that comes from recognizing harm caused to another person and wanting to make amends, then no, most narcissists do not feel that. But if by regret you mean the discomfort that arises when consequences threaten their self-opinion or disrupt their supply of validation, then yes, they feel something. It's a primitive form of regret, rooted in self-preservation, not morality. And that's where it becomes psychologically complex. Because even when they sense this loss, even when part of them knows they've damaged something, they can't process it in a healthy way. To do that would require emotional maturity, vulnerability, and a sense of moral responsibility. But the narcissist has spent a lifetime avoiding those things. So what do they do instead? They rewrite the story. They decide you were weak, overly sensitive, or unstable. They justify their behavior, not because it's right, but because it's easier than confronting the possibility that they were wrong. This is one of the most tragic patterns in narcissistic behavior, the loss of potential growth. Because there is, in that moment of internal discomfort, a real opportunity for transformation. But they can't seize it. They are too trapped in the fortress of their false self, a fortress built on control, maintained by denial, and guarded by shame. And so rather than grow, they regress. Rather than reach for accountability, they reach for distraction. They may jump into a new relationship, not out of love, but out of necessity. They need someone new to reflect the image they're desperate to restore. They may begin a smear campaign against you, trying to invalidate your version of the story, not because they believe it's false, but because they can't tolerate being the villain in anyone's narrative, including their own. But beneath it all, beneath the posturing, the stories, the distractions, there is a wound they will never admit to, a sense of inadequacy, of unworthiness, of being deeply unlovable. That's what they feel, even if they'll never say it out loud. And that's what drives them compulsively to hurt others before others can hurt them. So if you've been on the receiving end of this dynamic, if you've walked away, seen through the mask, and reclaimed your clarity, understand that your strength has revealed their weakness. Your truth has exposed their illusion. And that is not something they can ever unsee. You don't need their confession. You don't need them to validate your pain. The fact that they feel the need to rewrite the story at all is proof that they know on some level that you saw the truth. And once you've seen the truth, there's no going back. So walk forward with your head held high, not because they hurt you, but because you survived. And in that survival, you reclaim something they will always fear: your authenticity.